All right, so today we're diving into something pretty interesting, I gotta say.
Okay.
You sent us a whole list of parody names for a president,
Oh, wow.
for Donald Trump specifically, and some of these are wild.
Yeah.
Donald Duck, the American Nightmare,
Mm.
even Oompa Trumpa. It's like people really got creative with these.
Yeah, it seems like they had a lot of fun with it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But what I'm curious about is what these names tell us about how people view this particular president. Are they just for laughs, or is there something deeper going on?
Well, I definitely think it's more than just surface level humor. You know,
Yeah.
what we're seeing here is a form of political satire and has a really long and fascinating history,
Oh,
actually.
yeah, for sure.
Like, think about political cartoons. They use caricature and wit to make some pretty powerful statements.
Yeah.
These parody names are tapping into that same tradition, I think, using humor to comment on everything from policies to personality.
Yeah, it really got me thinking about the power of names and nicknames.
Mm.
I mean, how many times have you heard someone refer to him as the Donald?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
It's like these names become shorthand for our entire perception of a person.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so interesting. These names aren't just funny, they can actually shape how we see someone, for better or for worse. They condense all these complex feelings and opinions into these bite-sized labels that are almost impossible to shake off.
Okay, so let's dive into some specific examples. One that immediately jumped out at me was Ronald McDonald Trump.
Okay.
Obviously comparing him to a clown, but
Yeah.
what do you think is the deeper message there?
Well, on the surface, it's easy to see it as just mocking his appearance or his demeanor.
Right.
But I think it goes a little deeper than that. You know, clowns are often associated with entertainment and laughter,
Hmm.
but they can also be figures of absurdity and even chaos. By comparing Trump to Ronald McDonald, people might be expressing this sense of unease or distrust in his leadership, suggesting that his policies are frivolous or lack seriousness.
That's a really interesting point. It's like they're using
Wow.
humor to say, hey, this isn't a joke. We're not buying what you're selling.
Precisely. And it highlights the way satire can function as a form of social commentary. You know, it allows people to voice dissent or criticism in a way that's disarming,
Right.
yet still gets the message across.
Another name on the list that caught my eye was Donald Krabs,
Uh-huh.
an obvious reference to the money-grubbing character from SpongeBob. But what does that say about how people view Trump in a political context?
It speaks to the power of familiar figures, you know, to help us make sense of these complex public figures.
Yeah.
By drawing parallels to characters we already know, we can quickly grasp certain aspects of their personality or worldview.
Right.
So in this case, associating Trump with Donald Krabs taps into this perception of greed and obsession with wealth,
Yeah.
which some people might see as at odds with the role of a public servant.
It's interesting how these names can be both funny and incredibly pointed. At the same time, it's like people are using humor to say, we see you and we're not afraid to call you out on it.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that humor can be a powerful tool for holding those in power accountable.
Okay, let's move on to a name that's a bit more out there. We have Donald Choo Choo Chucklehead on the list. What do we make of something like that?
Well, sometimes humor is just about the joy of wordplay and absurdity, you know? This name might not have a deep political message,
Yeah.
but it reflects this playful side of language and our ability to find humor in the unexpected. It's a reminder that even in the midst of serious political discussions, there's still room for pure silliness.
And sometimes that silliness is exactly what we need. It could be a welcome break from the constant barrage of news and opinions.
Totally.
But let's get back to the more pointed names for a moment. One that really stood out to me was Don Trump-un. It combines his name with that of Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea.
Right.
This seems to be referencing a very specific, intense geopolitical situation.
You're right, and this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Don Trump-un is a prime example of how humor can reflect the anxieties of a particular time. It uses a linguistic device called a portmanteau, blending two words to create a new one with a combined meaning. In this case, it blends the names of two world leaders who at the time were engaged in this highly publicized and potentially dangerous standoff.
Right.
And this blending of names suggests a blurring of identities, perhaps highlighting a perceived similarity in their approaches to power or their disregard for international norms.
It's like people are saying, wait a minute, these two guys might be more alike than we initially thought.
Exactly, and it shows how humor can be used to process complex and unsettling situations. It allows us to confront our fears and anxieties through this lens of dark humor.
It almost feels like a modern-day version of those Cold War-era cartoons that depicted world leaders in these precarious situations.
You're spot on. Political cartoons have a long history of using humor to comment on international relations, often highlighting the absurdity of conflict and the personalities of the players involved.
Right,
This name seems to be doing something similar, albeit in a more concise and internet-friendly format.
for sure. And this brings us to a name that sparked some serious debate in the comments. Adolf Trumpler. Some people found it funny, while others felt it was way over the line.
That's a perfect example of how satire can be a double-edged sword.
Right.
It walks this fine line between insightful commentary and potentially offensive humor.
Yeah.
To understand why this particular name is so controversial, it's helpful to define what satire actually is.
Okay.
At its core, satire uses humor to expose and criticize folly or vice, often targeting individuals or institutions in a way that encourages reflection and hopefully change. But the effectiveness of satire depends heavily on shared cultural understanding and context.
So in this case, comparing Trump to Hitler is clearly meant to be provocative, but is it actually effective satire, or does it just cross a line?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
For some people, any comparison to Hitler, regardless of context, is inherently offensive and trivializes the horrors of the Holocaust. Others might argue that the comparison highlights certain authoritarian tendencies or policies they see in Trump's leadership, using shock value to provoke reaction and force people to confront uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
The key point here is that satire relies on shared understanding.
Okay.
If the audience doesn't grasp the intended message or interprets it in a way that wasn't intended, it can backfire spectacularly.
It's a reminder that even with humor, words have power, and we need to be mindful of their potential impact.
Absolutely.
But shifting gears a bit, I noticed another trend on this list. Names that play on Trump's personality,
Okay.
like Donald Grump or the Orange Julius Caesar. These seem less about specific policies and more about his general demeanor.
You're right, and this speaks to a fascinating aspect of political humor, the personal dimension.
Yeah.
These names aren't necessarily critiquing policies or ideologies, they're poking fun at his perceived personality traits.
Right.
Donald Grump plays on the idea of him being irritable and easily offended, while the Orange Julius Caesar references both his skin tone and his perceived aspirations to authoritarian rule.
I'm curious, do you think this focus on personality is unique to the internet age, or have we always used humor to roast our leaders' quirks and foibles?
Oh, this kind of personal lampooning has been around for centuries.
Really?
Like, think about the biting caricatures of political figures in 18th century England, or the satirical songs that mocked incompetent rulers throughout history. What's changed is the speed and reach of these jokes.
Okay.
In the past, a satirical cartoon might have been seen by a limited audience. Today, a meme or a viral tweet can reach millions in an instant.
So the internet has essentially amplified our ability to roast our leaders.
Precisely, and that has interesting implications for how we understand the power dynamics between politicians and the public.
Yeah.
In a way, this ability to create and share these kinds of parody names is a form of empowerment.
Sure.
It allows everyday people to poke fun at authority figures, to challenge their image and their control over the narrative.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's like we're using humor to level the playing field, to say, hey, you might be in charge, but we're not afraid to laugh at you.
Exactly, and that laughter can be incredibly powerful. It can undermine authority, expose hypocrisy, and create a sense of solidarity among those who share the joke.
Okay, so we've seen how these parody names can be funny, insightful, and even a bit unsettling. But what's the big takeaway here?
Yeah.
What does this tell us about the intersection of humor and politics in today's world?
I think the key takeaway is that humor is never just frivolous. It's a powerful form of communication that can be used to express dissent, build community, and challenge those in power.
Yeah.
These parody names offer a fascinating window into how people make sense of complex figures like Donald Trump, using humor to process their anxieties, frustrations, and hopes.
So we've been going over these parody names for a while now, but what does this all mean for you, dear listener?
That's the question I always find the most compelling. It's easy to get caught up in analyzing these trends, but the real value comes when we can apply these insights to our own lives.
Right. It's like holding up a mirror to how we use language and humor, even in our everyday conversations.
Exactly. Think about the nicknames you use for people in your own life. Friends, family, colleagues. Do those names carry a hint of affection, gentle teasing, or maybe even a bit of underlying tension?
That's funny you should mention that, because I was just thinking about how my friends and I used to come up with the most ridiculous nicknames for each other in high school.
Oh, yeah.
Most of them were totally absurd. But looking back, I realized some of them actually revealed a lot about our dynamics and inside jokes.
That's such a great example. It highlights how even seemingly silly nicknames can carry a lot of meaning and shape our perceptions of people. And it's not just limited to personal relationships. Think about the nicknames we collectively give to public figures, celebrities, even cities. The Big Apple for New York, the Windy City for Chicago. These names become part of their identity, shaping how we view and interact with them.
It's like we're constantly trying to distill complex ideas and individuals into these bite-sized labels.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to be aware of the power of language, even in its most casual forms.
Right.
The words we choose, even in jest, can have a real impact on how we understand and relate to the world around us.
So maybe the next time we're tempted to throw out a funny nickname, it's worth taking a moment to consider what message we're really sending, whether intentionally or not.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe this deep dive has inspired you to come up with some of your own clever parody names. After all, humor can be a powerful tool for understanding and engaging with the world around us.
That's a great point to end on. So, deep divers, if you've got any favorite parody names for presidents, celebrities, or even that one friend who's always late, share them with us. We'd love to hear your creative takes. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those laughs coming.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Keep
Yeah.
exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.